Hey, Talofa Leotawa, Dr. John Peterson here. TE2 Edge Sports Cards coming at you live and direct from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hope everyone's doing well out there, and we are back at the card table. I have gotten a pretty good amount of feedback, comments, views, that sort of thing with the PSA cheat code video from a few days back, so I figured I would do a part two. Check it out.
TE2 Edge Sports Cards. Get at it.
All right. Let's get started here. I thought we would spend just a couple minutes, not very long here, talking a little bit about some credentials. I mentioned in the cheat code video, I think it was the cheat code video, that I'm a former teacher. Taught for 7 years and was a school administrator, assistant principal, executive director for about 10 years in two large urban school districts, Minneapolis Public Schools and St. Paul Public Schools. Big shout out to St. Paul, Minneapolis. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Wisconsin, River Falls, and I majored in history, social studies, and Spanish with a secondary educational license. My master's in public policy and leadership, and my doctorate is in educational leadership. I'm a licensed superintendent, licensed principal, and 712 teacher in Spanish and social studies. I say that to put forward an idea that those degrees don't add up to a hill of beans when it comes to grading with PSA. Nor running a business, unless you've got a business background, have an undergraduate and or an MBA or a doctorate in business. Running a business is very different than working for an employer or working for a school or working for a school district. And, in that regard, I really have learned a lot from other YouTubers and content creators over the past 4 or 5 years that I've been on YouTube specific to sports cards. I started this channel back in 2018, but it was really about the book I published in 2018 and the music album that I've done. So as time has progressed, my interests and learning have evolved. And I just want to give a shout out to a couple people before I get started with this. One, I want to give a shout out to Little Victories. LV, watched a lot of his videos, still watch his videos. And I feel like his methodology is pretty solid. He has got a very keen eye for how to determine whether a card will come back from PSA or SGC, because he does sub with SGC too, in a particular grade. And so his reveals early on helped kind of shape and inform my methodology that I've been sharing with you in the cheat code video and that I'm about to share with you today. I also want to give a shout out to 3G Slabs. It's my homeboy, and I just wanted to say thank you, Matthew, because you demonstrated a relatively new way, I mean, similar to LV, but a relatively new way in terms of how you can do the reveals for the grades. And so what I did is I took the knowledge and the information that those two people shared generously, freely, right, and applied it to some of my own thinking. And that's really where this cheat code thing comes from. The term cheat code is, I think there were a couple people that may not have picked up on this, but is figurative language. It's not about cheating literally at PSA. You're not going to cheat PSA. Okay, that's not going to happen. PSA is a huge company. Their net worth might be, I don't know, $1 billion, $1.5 billion, $2 billion. I think they were estimated a few years back around $500 million, and I'm sure they've blown past that. There's no way you can cheat PSA, and I'm not trying to advocate for cheating in anything. The cheat code is really in how you train your eye and build your skill set and your knowledge and your capacity to improve. I want to be very clear with this, to not improve and get more PSA 10s, although that is the effect of the cause. The purpose is to improve the consistency, i.e. reliability, and accuracy, i.e. validity, with which you pre-grade your cards relative to the grades that you get back from PSA. That's the whole point of these videos. And I think it would be a misstatement for me to step out and say that you're going to get better grades, or that you're going to get PSA 10s or whatever it might be, or that you're going to somehow go from a 10% gem rate up to a 100% gem rate or 80% gem rate. That's not, I can't predict that. And I can't validate any sort of statement to that effect. What I can say is that when you have a system, and this grading stuff is a system, when you have a system that is fed by clean data, the outputs are going to be cleaner on the back end of the process. Really, when you think about it, it's inputs, processes, outputs, and then outcomes measured against a particular standard. And that standard for grading is, right now, for better or worse, PSA Gem Mint 10. That's where the highest liquidity is. That's where the highest value is, right or wrong. And if you're a dealer, if you're an investor, if you're a collector, it's a little different, right? And I have collected. I collected from 1981 up till about 2022 is when I stopped collecting. And I mean, I do have a collection, and I do have a PC. It's almost all vintage cards, and I'd love to share those with folks at some point. And I will do that. They're mostly cards from my dad that he passed on to me, and they're a lot of fun. And you can go check out other videos where I've gotten some of those cards graded and sold some of those cards. But, the minute you do this as a dealer or as a business, let me put it that way, because not all dealers run their operations as a business. I run a sports cards business. I actually have 2 sports cards businesses, in addition to a consulting business and in addition to a beverage company that I'm co-owner in. So I own businesses, and I do this from a business perspective. So I don't want to, give anyone any false information in that regard. But given that, you have to really think about, like, okay, so what is the outcome that I'm looking to get? The data is the through line from the inputs to the processes to the outputs to the outcomes. And you have to have data coming in order to inform how you make adjustments, formative adjustments, right? So the data helps you to assess formatively. Formative assessments would be assessments that you make and judgments that you make for future decision making and future learning, as opposed to summative assessments. Summative assessments and summative data are of past or prior learning, instruction, knowledge, that sort of thing, right? So you have to have both. You have to have formative data, and you have to have summative data in your system in order for things to get to the point where you're going to improve the outcomes, right? So I'm going to show you some summative data today that I think will be helpful. This is the part 2. If you're still watching, and I hope that you are, for those that are really serious about improving their skill set in terms of how they evaluate their cards before they send them in for grading. Let's take a look at some of this data that I just talked about. So I had shared with you in the first video that there's a methodology that you can use to help increase the accuracy and the consistency of the grades that you get back from PSA. And what I want to show you today is the aggregate data from quarter 1 and the first submission from quarter 2 from the subs that I've done this year so far. All right. I don't think I've shared this in a prior video, so this shouldn't be duplicative in any way. The number one point that I want to share with folks about this part of the video is that you have to track the data. You have to track the data over submissions. You can't just track the data for one submission because, an N size of 1 doesn't describe a trend. You have to have 3 data points to describe a trend. All right, so you have to have at least 3 different submissions in this case that you're looking at in order to determine whether your skills are improving or whether they're staying the same or whether they're declining. I also want to say, second principle is that this isn't an apples to apples type of situation. Submitting cards from the 1990s, let's just say basketball cards, inserts, is very different than submitting ultramodern cards. And submitting ultramodern cards is very different than submitting vintage cards. Number one, the way the cards were produced is different, or has been different, or was different. And the next point I want to make is that the people that grade those cards tend to be different people at PSA, I'm assuming. Their vintage graders are not the same people that grade the modern and ultramodern stuff. So, because I do submissions across different not grades, but submissions across different years and sets and products and that sort of thing, this isn't all apples to apples. Now, within the Jordan submissions that I've done, the vast majority of those cards come from the 1990s. So you could actually make a comparison that is a little bit more apples to apples. But, predictive analytics isn't the same thing as comparative analytics. And so I don't want to give a false impression to folks out there that everything that I share with you in terms of this data is apples to apples data. Although there are some patterns and some trends. And that's really what you're looking to ascertain as you send in your submissions. You're looking for patterns. And what are those patterns? Patterns in terms of the amount of time it takes to get the cards back. Patterns in terms of the number of cards that you accurately predict the grade for, and so on and so forth. All right, let's get into the data here a little bit. And again, like I said before, I put this all on paper first. I remember it better if I write it down, and then I transfer it over to Excel later on in the year, usually in Q4 when I'm kind of putting a bow tie around all the tax-related stuff. So these are submissions and returns for 2024, 2025. You can see that at the top. This is I put down the order number. I put down the date that the submission arrived, so you can see 12/4/24 at the top, and then the date that it was completed. This was February 7th. It took 2 months to get the submission back. Grading percentages. So if you haven't watched some of these other videos that I've done, this is just a real quick high-level summary. So I track the number of grades that I get correct. I track the number of pre-grades that I am overgrading, meaning I assigned a higher grade than what PSA did. And then I track the undergrading, which would be the number of cards that I graded tougher than PSA did. So I maybe gave it a predicted grade of 7 and PSA came back with an 8. So for this first order, the estimated profit I had at $700. The final profit was $775. I ended up doing a little bit better than I thought I was going to do for that first order. I had 52.5% of the predicted grades, the pre-grades, were correct. Unfortunately, I was overgrading the order by 52.5%. So right off the bat from this first data point, what this told me is that I need to get more strict in terms of how I pre-grade the cards that I send in. Second order arrived on 12/5, completed 2/14, took 2.5 months. I had 70% of the pre-grades correct. I was overgrading 20% of the order and undergraded 10% of the order. So you can see that drop from 52.5% to 20% in overgraded cards was pretty significant. I didn't profit a whole lot on this particular order, but overall, I felt like things had improved a little bit. But again, 2 data points describe a trend. You need 3. This next order is a little bit different because I did not do a pre-video, and so I did not predict the correct. I didn't predict the grades in that video, so let's skip that one. That's kind of an outlier. Next order arrived late January, completed late February. It was a value turbo order. This was kind of a unique order in that most of the cards were starting lineup cards, Jordans, and I just got hammered. So I think you might have seen the video, or it's in my library. You can check it out. Destroyed by PSA, I think is the title. I had 32% correct. I was overgraded 69% of the cards and under on 0%. So, I think the final, the estimated profit was $3,090. I think I made out with about $600 on that. 20% correct. I mean, it was not a good order. All right, so I'm stepping backwards. So this first one would say baseline, not doing great. Second order, improving. Third order, although this is a bit of an anomaly because they were mostly starting lineup cards, which are very different to grade than your traditional 90s cards for Jordan and Kobe. Nevertheless, things didn't improve here. So I needed to tighten things up a little bit. The next order, and I'm hoping this is helpful. I hope this is giving folks a little bit of an insight into some of the practices and methods you can use to improve how you submit and what you submit to PSA. Arrived on 12/20, completed 2/21, 2 months was the timeline to get the cards back. I think that's important, right, to keep track of how long it takes the cards to come back to you. Grading percentages, I had 49% correct. I was over on 38%, and I was under on 13%. So if you take 49% plus 13%, you get 62%. I was either correct or under, more strict than PSA. Estimated profit was $18.35, and I made about $22.95 on it. So I did pretty good on that one. Order number 6, you can see the arrival and the completed date. This was a little bit bigger order. It took about a month to get back. But again, if you look down under the grading percentages, I'm just going to hold this here with my right hand. I was over on 33% of the order. That's not good. That's way too high. You want to have that at less than 20%. I figure if you can get between 70 to 80% correct or undergraded, you're going to win on that order. But once you start creeping up above 25%, 30%, it's really tough. The estimated profit was $3,030. The final profit was $1,130. I was correct. The delta was a 63% delta between what I thought the profit would be and what the actual profit was, the final profit. So 37% correct isn't great. So quarter one totals, you can see the average was a 1.7 month return timeline. Estimated profit I had at $8,880. The final profit was closer to $5,200. I was correct on 51% of the order, or 51% of the predicted grades. I was over by 42.5%. That's somewhat skewed by that starting lineup order that I put in. So it was actually a little bit lower than that, but that's the final percentage. And then I was correct in terms of the profitization at a rate of about 60%. Right? So if you take 5,215 and divide it by 8,880, you can see that the delta between what I estimated for profit and what I had for final profit was about 40%, 41%. Okay? So that's quarter one. Let's take a look at this order number 7, which is the first and only order from quarter 2 that I've gotten back. It arrived on 3/19, completed 6/6, took 2.5 months, so it took a little bit longer. Obviously, it's been taking PSA longer because they've been receiving and grading more cards. Let's take a look at these percentages, though. You can see that 52% of the cards that I submitted, I got correct. That's pretty good. Anything over 50% hit rate in terms of the accuracy of the grades you assign, the pre-grades you assign, I think you're doing pretty good. The over-graded cards were 22%, which isn't too bad, right? I'd like to keep that under 20. But the undergraded cards were at around 26%, which means that I was more strict than PSA was on 26% of the order. So if you take 52 and you add that to 26, that gets you to 78%. So I was either correct or more strict than PSA on nearly 80% of the order. Now, the estimated profit was 61.40. The final profit was 46.25. But I was correct at about 3/4 of the profitization, so 75% correct, which if you look at the quarter one data, I was at 59%. Okay, so I went up 16 percentage points with this first order of the second quarter. Now, again, this is one data point from quarter two. You have to assign other data points, and I'll get other data that comes in. This might be the only order that comes in for quarter two because things have slowed down at PSA and it's taken a little bit longer for stuff to come back, obviously. So the next few orders might be from quarter three, or they might even bleed over into quarter number 4. But you can see that the percentage correct increased, as well as the undergraded percentage increased, and then the delta between the estimated profit and the final profit was actually closed a little bit. So that's pretty much it. I think it's really important to track the data. If you don't track the data for your submissions and you're submitting on a regular basis, you're going to be kind of like I was a few years back, where you're just at the whim of PSA's inconsistent and at times inaccurate grading. I don't disagree with what people have put in the comments for the last video, the cheat code video. PSA does have a lot of inconsistency and they do have some inaccurate grades. However, I have found that when I started tracking the data in the way that I've described in this video and the prior video, that inconsistency and lack of accuracy decreased. And what I found is that some of the errors that I had assigned to PSA were actually errors that I had made, things that I had missed, hasty decisions that I had engaged in terms of what I submitted, especially around surface. So that's why I'm advocating for people to look at the cards 3 and 4 times, and especially look at the surface at least 2 different times, because surface is where I have found most of the issues have arisen from. Typically, I'm good on corners. Typically, I can find edges. For the most part, I get the centering piece, although I don't measure my cards like some people do, which is, I think, phenomenal. I know that PSA does measure. Maybe not every card, but I know that they do have folks that measure, graders that measure. But the surface piece is really critical, especially with modern and ultra modern. All it takes is one dimple or one crease or one indentation on your card to drop it 2 or 3 or even sometimes 4 grades. Oftentimes, when I get an order back of modern and ultra modern and I get a grade of 6 that I thought was going to be a 9 or a 10, it's surface. And I would say 9 out of 10 times, it's because I missed it. So I have actually improved the favorability with which I view PSA's grading system when I started to track the data. And I took more responsibility and more ownership over the effort that I put in to pre-grading the cards and preparing the order and submitting the order. That was, in large part why I did the cheat code video in the first place. I wanted folks to see that when you invest more time into something, you get a higher return on that investment if you follow a process and if you have some data informing the decisions that you make, both formative data that is for future decision making and learning, and summative data, which I shared with you today, that is of prior learning, of prior decision making. The combination of the formative data and the summative data is what really provides you with, quote unquote, the cheat code, right? Because you have to track that data. In the absence of that data, you're shit out of luck, folks. You're at the mercy of PSA, and you're going to consistently be frustrated by the fact that you're getting grades back that aren't gem mint 10s. I don't have anything against tracking your PSA 10 gem mint percentage, but that's not the way to run a business, in my opinion. If you want to run a business and you want to hopefully go from losses to profit, you have to have a system down for how you're tracking that information. And for me, in my experience, the more time and the more effort that I've put into the process, the inputs and the process, the better the outputs and the outcomes have been. And I've got about, 400 cards currently sitting with PSA being graded. And it'll be really interesting to see how closely what the correlation is, how tight or strong the correlation is, right? The relationship between the pre-grades and the final grades assigned by PSA. Really, you want to close that correlation and make it as strong and as tight as possible. Loose correlations lead to outcomes and output that is a little flim-flam, to use a real technical scientific word. So I hope this was helpful. I don't know. Got a lot of views, or a fair amount of views, not a lot of views, relatively speaking, a lot of views for my channel. I have a fair amount of subscribers, but a lot of them are from a number of years ago. And my YouTube content has ebbed and flowed over the years, and I'm trying to get a little bit more consistent with that. So in that regard, I really appreciate your viewership. Hit the like or subscribe button, hit the bell notification, and for sure leave me a comment, even if what I'm saying is the opposite of what you think or the opposite of what you feel. I'd love to hear it, because I like to engage in dialogue. Having some dialogue is how we get to the synthesis, right? The thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. And it's all a part of the process. Really, my number one goal for this channel is for people to hopefully take a few things, like I say, rip the best and ditch the rest. I'm hoping that people can take some of the things that I've learned over the years, some of the mistakes that I've made, because I certainly have made plenty of them, despite the the advanced degrees. It's a learning process. And the best advice I think I got from my friend Eli was watch YouTube videos. Put your time and put your study in. And if you do that, you will start to learn, and you'll start to grow and see better results over time. So thanks for watching, folks. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a blessed day, and peace out. One love.